morning, wherever you're coming from. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Marie Ashway. I'm with Mainline Information Systems. And with us today, we have Bob Elliott and Christina Perez, also with Mainline, and Eric Herzog and Chris Akel with IBM, who will be joining us as well, Eric being our guest speaker today. All right, so now I am going to turn this over to Mr. Bob Elliott, who is our Vice President of Storage Sales here at Mainline, who's going to set us up, and then he'll turn this over to Eric Herzog, and then I'll be back with some more polls. Don't go away. Okay, Bob, it's all yours.
Thank you, Marie, and thank you for the poll. For those of you who don't know Marie does an internal call basically every week at Mainline and polls the audience, and we're always excited to find out what she's going to ask us. So that's great. Actually, as we were going through that, I was thinking to myself, Eric, if you could move to the next chart. I think you're driving the charts. I was going to do a quick overview of Mainline, and the first thing is 1989 is when we were founded, and trying to put that into perspective. What bands? I wish I had a poll. I could do it for you right now. What bands were popular in 1989 song-wise? And it was Milli Vanilli, Richard Marx, the Bangles. That puts in perspective, I think, how long Mainline's been around, because Milli Vanilli is long gone, as we know. So we are very, very solid, well-versed partner of IBM's. We started out as an IBM partner exclusively, and we've been an IBM partner for the last, what is that? God, don't make me do math, 32 years. So we've been around a while. We're headquartered in Tallahassee, Florida. We have over 350 employees nationwide. That's a big point I want to make sure that I stress is we are nationwide. We're not just in one location. So wherever you are, there's probably a Mainline employee somewhere in the near vicinity. And the other thing to put in perspective as to the size of Mainline, we're over $1 billion in revenue, which makes us a pretty substantial firm and partner of IBM's. Eric, if you could move to the next chart. So that poses the next question: why do you want to do business with Mainline? Obviously, you want to do business with Mainline because we do business with IBM. But above and beyond that, what are the things that Mainline brings to the table? And the situation is that we have lots of resources above and beyond, what you get necessarily with your basic manufacturer. We can bring subject matter experts to the table, and we've got some core competencies as we've highlighted here. My own personal core competency is the enterprise systems and storage, but we've got practices and competencies and subject matter experts in these other areas as well. So I want to make sure that you guys have an understanding of why Mainline's important, but also why we work well with IBM. And speaking of working well with IBM, I would like to introduce, for those of you who don't know, Eric Herzog, Chief Marketing Officer. I'm looking for the titles: Vice President, Business Development and Evangelism. I like that. There's a little bit of Ernest Angley in that title. I like that. But from my perspective, Eric is a great friend of Mainline, a great friend of mine, and an unbelievable resource that IBM brings to the table. And I think you're going to see exactly what I'm talking about. So without further ado, Eric, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Really appreciate everybody's time. We're really going to talk about how data and cyber resilience are critical for your storage infrastructure. Most people, when they think about a comprehensive cybersecurity strategy, do not include their storage. They include the moat with the alligators. They include the castle wall. They include the Sheriff of Nottingham, who coincidentally didn't even know who Robin Hood was till the very end of the book, or if you watch the movie. So you're going to realize as we go through this that if you don't have a comprehensive data and cyber resilience strategy for your storage environment, you are not providing a comprehensive cybersecurity strategy for your company. Now, their impact goes without saying. Whether you look at the ransomware attacks that are going to happen, you're talking a cost of over $20 billion this year alone, ones that have hit the news. Obviously, Continental Pipeline, the eastern part of the United States, 4.4 billion. The Irish healthcare system about a week later was shut down for a whole week. They didn't disclose if they paid a ransom or not. Of course, JBS, which is the largest meat packing company in the world with operations all over the world, based in Brazil, headquartered in Brazil, they paid 11 million. And you may have heard of the one at Kia Motors in Korea. No one knows the actual cost, but the University of Illinois has estimated that Kia Motors out of Korea, which, as you know, is close to $100 billion, paid a $74 million ransom. So this is a big deal. And from a storage perspective, you can be the hero. Fortune magazine's Fortune 500 recently came out, and in the survey that came out with it, they asked Fortune 500 CEOs, not the CIO, not the CFO, not the CTO, not the chief security officer if it's a large company, which almost all of the Fortune 500 have, but the chief executive officers. 66% of them cited their top concern as a threat to their business cybersecurity, not pandemic, not war, not lack of enough employees to work at their companies, not education. Number one, 66% of the Fortune 500 CEOs said cybersecurity was their major, major concern. Marie, take it away.
Got it. So I promised you all I'd be back with more polls. So going along the lines of Eric's discussion, is storage infrastructure part of your corporate security strategy? Yes, no, or you're not sure, which is a perfectly fine answer. Let's see, we've got many of you saying yes, a few of you saying no, and ever so few lower than that saying not sure. But majority of you are saying, yeah, like 80% of you are saying yes. So thank you. I'm going to close that down. Okay, Eric, it's back to you.
Okay. Now, when you think about traditional resiliency from a storage perspective, of course, you think disaster recovery and business continuity, which in this diagram is the green column. So from a replication perspective, error detection, recovery points, isolation, you can see what you've got. And of course, in the green column, it's mostly centered on disaster recovery and business continuity. Earthquake, fire, flood, tornado. That's what you're worried about. And as you know, IBM excels in that area. For example, on our FlashSystem family, even at our lowest entry product, we provide 3-site replication. That's not common in entry all flash array products. In fact, usually it's in the upper end only from our competitors. So we've got you there. But what we're adding now and being very focused on is the data and cyber resiliency aspect, which is the blue column on the far right. For example, with replication, you need to create point-in-time copies that are stored in an isolated, secure location. And that gets to a technology known as air gapping. These point-in-time copies can be physically air-gapped to tape, logically air-gapped. And with logical air-gapping, you can be either local or you can be remote, AKA doing a snap or a replica out to a cloud provider. So with that blue column and the green column, you get the most comprehensive resiliency technology. A, to help you with disaster recovery and business continuity, such as a hurricane. I happen to be in Houston, by the way, on Monday when the hurricane hit. I'm now in Dallas, Texas, so away from the hurricane, but that would be the green column. But then the blue column would be malware, ransomware, bad employees. If your data is not being encrypted and one of the IT employees gets approached by your competition, they could steal that data and sell it. And yes, people say that never happens. Well, it does. In 2005, I was called into a court case. I ended up not being seated for the jury. And it was 10 IT people at 10 different banks. I'm not sure how they got together, but 10 different IT people stole from 10 different banks, including Bank of America, Citi, and Chase, $175 million. So that would not be malware. That would not be ransomware. That would basically be industrial espionage or corporate theft. So it's not just about DR and business continuity. This malware, ransomware, and internal IT theft are critical issues, and that's what the blue column helps you do. Now, we've taken a very strong architectural approach to data resilience, and there are a number of things you need to consider. First of all, what's the data life cycle? Where does it land? Where is it created? And what are you doing with it? You need to classify your data. You need to determine the value of data. So let's take an example. IBM Corporation owns buildings all over the world. So those are physical assets. And of course, we have a physical asset database. Our building at 590 Madison in New York, our building in Australia. And all of those, of course, we have desks, and we got laptops and iPads and phones, etc. So if there really was a malware or ransomware attack, do you think that physical asset database is very, very important? It's important, but is it very, very important that you need to be up and going in 2 to 3 hours after a ransomware attack? No. But is our supply chain? Yes. Is our cloud? Yes. Is our accounts payable, accounts receivable? Yes. So you classify your data determined by its relevance. That helps you come up with this architectural approach to data resilience. You want to make sure you're designed for recovery. You're going to see as we walk through our safeguarded copy that instead of having recovery that can take you weeks to recover, we can recover in 2 to 3 hours. You want to automate as much as possible. We all know that ever since the downturn of 2008, while capacity has increased 100-fold, you do not have 100-fold storage administrators. And in fact, when you look at IT headcount, which is now higher than it was back in 2008, the number of storage admins, network admins, and server admins has actually dropped. Yet the amount of capacity that they're managing has exploded exponentially. So automation is critical to this. And just as with traditional disaster recovery, you practice, you practice, you practice. We're in football season now. Well, let's see. The college teams showed up in about July. The pro teams also. They do go through their whole summer camp, and then in between games, they practice. Okay, baseball, spring training. Tennis, yes, and the golf. They got the tournaments on the weekend, but what do you think they're doing Monday through Thursday? They're practicing. So practicing is a big deal, and you need to make sure that you are doing that practicing to ensure that you've got the best solution. Now, you want to make sure that in addition to that, you look at the wheel of security. You want to look at what are you doing to identify, managing the credentials and the acquisition of that data to make sure you're bringing safe data. Administrative roles and rights, you're going to see with our safeguarded copy, which can allow you, again, recovery in 2 to 3 hours. We have multiple administrators. Why? It's common in the security world, and that checks and balances what makes sure that you may not have that bad employee or the bad employee can't do something wrong. You want to manage the security placement and copies of the data at the data level. You want to manage the integrity of the data. What are you doing at the bit level? For example, things like bit rot protection or encryption. Many players will not encrypt their data because the software side of the house or the CIO will say, well, if you encrypt that SAP workload, it's going to dramatically slow down. Well, guess what? With IBM's Flash system, you can encrypt real-world application data with 0 performance penalty. That Mongo workload, same performance whether it's encrypted or non-encrypted. And our Flash systems are known as being the fastest all-flash arrays in the industry. That SAP workload, that Oracle workload. So there's no excuse not to encrypt. Well, guess what? Most people don't, and that is a data and cybersecurity risk. And of course, you want to manage the authenticity and use of the container applications. The world is now not only bare metal, not only virtualization, but now includes the world of containers. And you need to make sure that the containers, which have a different security profile than clearly bare metal and clearly virtualization, you want to make sure that you are factoring that in as you go forward. Now, there are a number of best practices around data resilience that span our portfolio and our rule of thumb. First, administrative security, we talked about that already. You identify and monitor, and what we've done is spread that across our entire portfolio. So let's take an example. Although we're not discussing it today, you can talk to your Mainline representative about our Spectrum Protect. Spectrum Protect, industry-leading enterprise backup and modern data protection, has AI-based pattern anomaly detection. Well, why would you care? Let me tell you why. If your normal backup workload is 2 hours and all of a sudden the pattern changes, it's not 2 hours, it's now 4 hours, that could be an indication that malware or ransomware is encrypting the data so that they could hold you for ransom, or that they could destroy the data in the background. So that AI-based pattern detection would automatically send an email to your backup administrators, your storage administrators, or both, and say, hey, something is crazy, something is weird, you need to investigate, so you want to detect. Encryption we've discussed already, but most people do not encrypt. They do not. It's not just the federal government or the largest banks in the world. With IBM's FlashSystem, as you're going to see in a second, you can encrypt all kinds of data sets with no performance penalty. Multiple layers of backups, snapshots, traditional backup with backup software such as our Spectrum Protect or Protect Plus, and making sure that when you do a recovery, you can do it into an isolated environment. Because malware or ransomware can often work in the background for 200 days or more, you may not know you have it. And guess what you're doing? You're backing up the malware or ransomware. So when you do a recovery, you want to recover into an isolated environment. You pick a time when you think it's good, right? We think that the data is good from April 15th, and you recovered April 15th. And if you find out that the recovery is not good, because the last thing you want to do is do an entire data set recovery. You just cleaned off the malware and ransomware off your primary servers and your primary storage, right? So you're now clean, and now you bring a backup that's stuck with the malware or ransomware. So that's why you do this isolated environment. Another technology, which we mentioned already, is air gapping. Air gapping, the concept of an air gap is that the data sits on different networks. So there's 3 types of air gapping, and at IBM Storage, we do all of them. And many of our customers use 2 or more of them, depending on the application workload and use case, and depending on the amount of data resilience they think they need for certain data sets. So one, which we're going to talk about today, is logical local air gapping, safeguarded copy. You can do logical remote air gapping. This is where you snapshot or replicate to either another data center if you're running a private cloud, or if you're running a hybrid cloud, your favorite cloud provider of choice. When you do that, you're taking the data from the internal network and you're now putting it on the cloud provider's network. So far, no known malware or ransomware has been able to traverse that logical air gap. That doesn't mean they're not working on it. If I was the head of the cyber mafia, I certainly would know that, because cyber criminals are, technology criminals. They're not the guys that walk in, like in the old mafia movies. That's not what you're going to see. Okay, what you're going to see are highly intelligent, college-educated hackers, and these guys know what they're doing. So they do know that a logical air gap is out there. So far, no logical remote has been hacked, but it does give you that protection of having isolated networks and different networks. And then physical air gapping to tape, and you can actually do multiples of these between the logical local air gap, the logical remote air gap, and the air gapping to tape. And many of our customers do that already. And then, as I mentioned, orchestration and automation. The amount of storage admins, and as well as a server admin that might be helping the storage guys or the network admins, has all dropped from a peak of 2008. Yet all of you are managing exponentially more storage. So automation and orchestration makes it easier for you, and it makes it much faster and swifter to recover. So before we go deeper, let's talk about our IBM Flash systems that's available from Mainline. We've had this technology now for a number of years. 2 years ago, we introduced a single family that spans entry, mid-range, and high-end enterprise workload with seamless integration to hybrid cloud and container environments. They all run the same software, award-winning Spectrum Virtualize and IBM Storage Insights. One API, one RAID stack. They're known for their performance, and with Spectrum Virtualize, they also happen to be known for an incredible amount of enterprise class data sets. And with our 5200, 7200, and 9200, you can actually use our Spectrum Virtualized to provide those enterprise class data services, not just to IBM storage, but to our competitor storage as well. That's right. So for those of you that are heterogeneous, if you want safeguarded copy and this air gapping technology on an older EMC array, guess what? You got a flash system 7200 or 52 or 9200, you can actually do that. So we can extend the enterprise class data services, including the data and cyber resiliency technology of safeguarded copy, to non-IBM storage. The industry is noting that we're jumping ahead of rivals. For example, Dell EMC, in order to cover what you can do for all non-mainframe operating systems, so Windows, Linux, and what's left of the Unix market, we have one family. Dell EMC has 8 different families with different RAID stacks, different GUIs, different APIs. With IBM storage, we can do it with one family that has entry, mid-range, and high-end. Now, the Flash system family is built with data resilience and cyber resilience in mind. What we have done is put a number of technologies to the forefront to help you do that. So first is our enhanced high availability. This gives a 0 RPO and RTO. When you do it with our high-end flash system, or what also is known as our SAN volume controller, this high availability with 0 RPO and RTO can be available not only on IBM storage, but on our competitor storage as well, using what's known as HyperSwap. HyperSwap can give you 100% data availability guarantee. Please reach out to your mainline executives to do that. Again, with 0 RPO and RTO, not only for IBM storage, but for our competitors as well. Enterprise disaster recovery capability with 0 RTO. This gives you 2 and 3 site replication, depending on what you want to do. And it can be combined with HyperSwap. And we actually have a couple public references on IBM.com who have combined our HyperSwap technology with replication and have had 0 downtime. We mentioned encryption. This is FIPS 140-2 level 3 technology. And most importantly, not only does it hit that high standard of encryption level, but what it also does not slow down your real world applications at all. No performance impact. So there's no excuse not to be encrypting your data with a flash system technology. And the focus of today will be on safeguarded copy. How we can create immutable local air gaps that can give you a recovery in just a few hours from a malware or ransomware attack.
Hey,
Now,
Eric, can I jump in for a quick second with a question?
Absolutely.
So I want to make sure we grab this while you were talking about encryption a little while ago. So Terry is asking if she encrypts, or he, I'm sorry, Terry, he or she encrypts on the Flash System 7200 and they're using IBM Spectrum Protect, how will it unencrypt before the backup as Spectrum Protect encrypts data at rest?
Okay, so basically what happens is Spectrum Protect can understand that the data set is encrypted and can execute a backup against that data set. Okay, Spectrum Protect also can do encryption as well. So if you have unencrypted data and you decide not to encrypt it at the primary site, you can then use Spectrum Protect and it will encrypt the data when you back it up. Also, we can encrypt to tape. So we have encryptable tape cartridges that even if you're not using Spectrum Protect and using a different backup package that supports tape, you actually are backing up into a cartridge that encrypts at the cartridge level. So you have multiple different ways to encrypt both on primary storage and then on secondary storage with Spectrum Protect or also with tape. So multiple different ways to do that. But in this case, from a primary storage perspective, you want to encrypt on the primary side, because if you encrypt the backup, that's great. But that doesn't mean the bad IT guys that robbed those banks of $175 million aren't stealing you blind from your primary storage, because they're managing that as well, which is why we would argue that you can continue to encrypt your backups, but you do need to encrypt your primary storage. And in the old days, when you would do that, that would be a huge hit on performance. So of course you would encrypt the backups only. But now that you can have a flash system deliver that encryption capability with no performance penalty, there's no reason not to also encrypt on primary storage.
Great. Thank you, Eric, and thanks, Terry, for that question. Okay, thank you.
So let's get into safeguarded copy. It's available on our flash system and our SAN volume controller. Basically, you can create immutable, non-alterable, point-in-time copies of production data. The data is isolated, so it creates a logical air gap that's local and offline to the hosts. We're going to talk a little more about the separate privilege for administrators, and it's at no charge. Spectrum Virtualize includes safeguarded copy. So it's part of the Spectrum Virtualize software that comes on every flash system and every SAN volume controller. So there's no charge for the safeguarded copy. On any individual storage array, you can create up to 15,000 copies, and the limit per volume is 255 copies per volume, which means if you're making a safeguarded copy every day, that's 255 days. If you're making a safeguarded copy of your data every 12 hours, that's 127 days. We prevent modification. It is immutable. Many of you are familiar with the technology known as write once, read many, worm, and this basically provides the equivalent of worm technology on primary all-flash arrays. You can't delete it. The user can't do anything to it, which could be malicious, right? Obviously, malware would be introduced from the outside, so you have malicious intent inside, but also malware should come from the outside, and ransomware as well. So all of those are prevented with this capability. There's three legs to this stool, the three key technologies that safeguarded copy delivers on flash system. First is the separation of duties, and the next slide we're going to go deeper into that separation of duties. You're going to see three separate types of admins. The protected copies of the data, again, immutable, they're secure, they're point in time, and they're logically isolated from the primary storage volumes. And then the speed of recovery, you're recovering locally from an all-flash array to an all-flash array, which is why you can recover in a couple hours versus when you're doing something remotely or to tape, where it could take days or even weeks. So it gives you that very rapid recovery to get you up and going in 2 to 3 hours. The industry analysts are very strong on what we deliver with safeguarded copy, and its big advantages to providing that key cog in the data and cyber resiliency wheel for your entire company. Now, at the administration level, we've separated the duties. Okay, we are providing checks and balances. For those of you that also happen to manage your security infrastructure, you know this is very common with the security software companies. So you've got three levels: the administrator, the super user, and the security administrator. You can see the various functions and the differences. So for example, the regular administrator cannot remove or damage an existing safeguarded copy, even though they're an administrator. But the security administrator can remove a safeguarded copy or remove a safeguarded copy pool. So again, a separation of duties. The security administrator can do certain things the regular administrator cannot, and the super user can do certain things that the others can't. So this gives you the checks and balances you need to feel confident that not only are we delivering the right technology from the purely making this separate copy of the data, but you're not at the vicissitudes of disgruntled employees or any sort of administrative guffaws. And for those of you that are very familiar with security technologies, you know this is common in the security software world. And because this is a heavily secure technology, we felt that we would mimic what the security vendors often do. Now, the protected copies, again, provide that immutability. They are a thin provision point-in-time copy using our battle-hardened flash copy snapshot technology. And because it's locally stored on an all-flash array, it can be rapidly restored if there is a malware or ransomware event. They are not mapped to the host. So while the primary storage is mapped to the host, when you create the safeguarded copy, by not being mapped to the host, you create that air gap, that logical air gap. The host can't see it anymore. Now, obviously, when you're recovering after the malware attack, of course, you've got to map back to either the original host and its associated volume or to a new volume. But when you're creating the safeguarded copies, the host cannot see them. They cannot be written to or read by an application, and they cannot be deleted. You can automatically create and delete based on a predefined schedule, which we'll talk about on our next slide. So this gives you that logical separation from the primary production volumes. You've got capacity control because you'll see as we get to the capability of managing the safeguarded copies that you have an exact idea of what that capacity is going to be. And you already saw about the access restrictions with the separation of duties. The City of Tyler in Texas, the existing flash system count, they're very, very high on what they need. Obviously, as the CIO of the City of Tyler, Texas, which is approximately 500,000, this includes obviously the tax records, the finance for the county, or the city, the fire department, the EMTs, all this. So obviously this is all very critical data. And the last thing you want is a ransomware attack to the fire department. Not good. Or to the EMTs that are supporting, of course, the local hospitals. So he's very, very excited about what Safeguarded Copy can deliver. Now, Safeguarded Copy and Spectrum Virtualize integrate with the IBM Copy Services Manager. This helps in the creation, deletion, and restoration automation of the safeguarded copies. There's multiple ways to procure it at the bottom left here. So we've got a number of different ways you can license it with, if you will, suites like our Spectrum Control product or our Virtual Storage Center, but also you can buy it separately. And for those of you that already are using the Copy Services Manager for your DS8000 family on a mainframe, if you have extra licenses, you can just allocate those extra licenses to be used with Spectrum Virtualize and Safeguarded Copy on flash systems. So Spectrum Virtualize can automatically integrate with the Copy Service Manager to create copies based on predefined schedules. I already mentioned earlier that maybe on a certain volume, you want to make a safeguarded copy once a day. On a different volume, you can set it up to be twice a day, or every 4 hours, or every 6 hours. You can automate the restore of a safeguarded copy using the Copy Services Manager, and you can restore that either to the original source volume or to a new volume. And because you can set how long you think you need the copies, you can automatically delete. Remember, you're limited to 255 copies on a single volume and 15,000 for an entire array. So if you have a certain volume and you are making copies every 12 hours, but you think you really only need copies for 60 days, then you tell it you only want copies for 60 days, which 60 times 2 would be 120. So even though you can create 255, you're only going to keep the last 120. So it frees up and automates the deletion of the older copies of the safeguarded copy. There's no API for copy deletion. As you know, IBM storage software, Spectrum Virtualize, Spectrum Protect, Spectrum Scale, all of our software is replete with APIs, and it's replete with APIs so it can automate processes across our own software, but also interfacing to other software. So in this case, there's no exposed API for copy deletion because that would be, of course, a backdoor. And of course, the Copy Services Manager manages not just one array, but multiple arrays. So you can coordinate and catalog copies across multiple systems. You can track what you're doing on array 1 and all the volumes on array 1 and all the volumes on array 2 and all the volumes on array 3. And it seamlessly integrates, of course, with Safeguarded Copy, which is a feature of Spectrum Virtualize. Now with these copies, there's a number of use cases. One is early validation. You think you got a problem. The second is extensive forensics. You know you got a problem, and so when you have a problem at the doctor and they say, we think you have the Hinklemeyer disease, well, then they run a bunch of tests related to Hinklemeyer. If they think you have the bleep snort disease, they run a different set of tests. So the forensics on that. You can do surgical recovery. Remember, we talked about accidental deletion or malicious of an employee. So let's say employee X maliciously deletes certain financial data that you have safeguarded copies of, and you find that out. So you get rid of that employee, but now you need to restore. Well, guess what? You know that they were deleting the accounts payable information, for example. So instead of doing a complete recovery, you can surgically find just the accounts payable and recover the accounts payable. You have catastrophic. In this case, just as if a hurricane knocks down an entire building or an earthquake destroys the bridge, in this case, you would have the entire environment and you would go back to a known good copy of safeguarded copy, and do a recovery. And the recovery would take 2 to 3 hours versus taking days or weeks. Now, I mentioned earlier about combination of the air gaps. So in this case, you can combine your safeguarded copy with either a logical remote, so you can take the safeguarded copy and snap it either to another data center for your private cloud or to a hybrid cloud configuration, or you can take it and go out to tape. We have had safeguarded copy on the mainframe now for several years, what's known as our DS family in the mainframe environment. And many of the companies doing that, we have well over 100 using safeguarded copy on the mainframe. So obviously mostly the larger companies in the world. And what we're seeing is most of them have at least 2. So they're either creating a safeguarded copy and putting it out to tape for that extra level of protection, or a safeguarded copy and going remote. Remember, malware or ransomware can possibly sit there for hundreds of days, even if it's only 90 days. So remember, if you have a fire in data center A and all the arrays get burned up, right, which would happen possibly, or a hurricane or whatever, you've got a duplicate copy, because if you're a large entity, you have multiple data centers, not just the one. So if the malware or ransomware is dormant, maybe it's sitting in the other data center as well. And so you can then use a safeguarded copy. So, going to tape or out, having it as a snap, encourage that if there is malware or ransomware, but there also happens to be a physical disaster, like a hurricane or an earthquake, that you've got a known good copy that can be recovered to a different data center. So that's why they do it. You don't have to do it that way, but you can do this offline copy of a safeguarded copy, giving you, stronger protection and greater retention. For example, you can only do 255 copies of this. Certain data sets, maybe you want to make the full 255, and then you want to back it up to tape or snap it out to the cloud, which gives you more copies than 255, because you got the 255, and then you have an older 255 that you put out to tape or out to snap. Okay, so there's a number of reasons why you might want to do the offline and give you dual capability of safeguarded copy. Now, we've also integrated safeguarded copy with IBM's award-winning security software, QRadar. QRadar provides you real-time for early detection of attacks and data breaches. QRadar looks at your access logs, your server logs, and your networking logs. And with the integration of QRadar with IBM storage, also looks at the storage auto logs as well. So now it's looking at the storage, the access logs, the server logs, and the networking logs as well. If it detects a threat, in certain instances, you configure it to automatically kick off a safeguarded copy. That's right. You're combining the security technology of early breach with QRadar and with the safeguarded copy capability as well. There is a red book. It's at the very center of this slide. This gives you a complete reference architecture of how to deploy this. And by the way, for any of you using our IBM Spectrum Scale for your AI and big data workloads, or your IBM Elastic Storage System, also for AI big data workloads, Spectrum Scale also has an integration with QRadar. So a different red book exists for integration with our Spectrum Scale product and our IBM Elastic Storage System, also known as the ESS. So integration with QRadar gives you something that helps enhance the capability and clearly differentiates it from our competitors as well. Any questions so far, Marie, before I go to my last slide and then pass it back?
We do have some questions, Eric, so good time to pause. Got a bunch of questions. Let's see. Deborah is asking, does Spectrum Virtualize automatically delete after 255 copies?
Yes, it does, but you integrate Spectrum Virtualize with a copy services manager to manage that capability, and you don't have to wait till you get to 255. At 255, it automatically will start doing it, but if you have, if you only need it for 60 days and you're doing safeguarded copy every 12 hours, then again, for 60 days, it would be 2 times, right? So you'd have 120. So you'd only go to 120, but you can configure all that with a copy services manager. That's the idea of integrating the copy services manager, its management of snapshot technology with safeguarded copies. You can have control of that and also vary that volume by volume which means you can vary it by array as well. So that's the idea. Next question.
Thanks, and thanks, Deborah. And Brian has a question. Brian's question is CSM, Copy Services Manager, required to use Safeguarded Copy, or can it be done with CLI?
There is a way to do it with custom scripting with CLI. We do, obviously, in this era of less storage admins than there's been in the past, and storage being exponential, we recommend the Copy Services Manager. There are a number of ways to get it, as you saw back on that slide, with our Spectrum Control, with our Virtual Service Center, and with the IBM full software suite, our Spectrum Storage Suite. And anyone on the mainframe can use extra licenses for Spectrum Virtualized Flash System, or you could buy it. And quite honestly, it's very low cost. It's it's one of our lowest cost software products. So it is worth probably doing it, but you could do it with custom scripting if you wanted to.
Great, thank you, Eric, and thank you, Brian. And let's see, another question here. Terry was looking for a copy of the slide deck that they also use QRadar. So Terry and everybody, there is a copy of the slide deck loaded into the handout window of your control panels. You can download this right now, anytime before this presentation ends. So go ahead and grab that deck. I'm also going to chat out to everybody a link to our blog site, and specifically to a blog about Safeguarded Copy on Flash Systems that was written by one of our IBM champions, Laura Teller, who is a storage specialist here at Mainline. We love her to death. And she has a really insightful blog written about all of this. So I am going to also chat that out here on the chat window. And that is all the questions for now.
Okay, great. So before I pass it to Bob, I'd like to point out something that we're doing now for free. So this is available. You contact Mainline or IBM. This is a free cyber resilience assessment. We work with the NIST framework, which of course, as you know, is built from a cybersecurity strategy. No cost to you. So you need to answer a bunch of questions. We will then produce back really the outcome to identify blind spots or recommended areas for changes, what you're doing, how you can use the existing storage estate that you have better, or if you need new things like integration. If you have QRadar, we'd say, well, you got a good integration with Flash System, but here's some gaps. This, by the way, is not for IBM storage. It's for your entire storage estate. So if you're, excuse me, if you're heterogeneous in nature, this is just as usable. So the free cyber resilience does not do IBM storage only. The storage free cyber resilience assessment will do it for all storage that you have, both ours and our competitors. There are 2 documents at ibm.com that are at the very bottom, but you can easily schedule this by reaching out to your Mainline solutions architect, systems engineer, or salesperson, and they will contact with us. And again, we will charge you nothing. So this is free to you. You know it's the right type of technology because it relies on our NIST, or I should say the industry standard NIST framework. This is not something we've come up on our own. This is an industry standard framework, which is NIST, which of course talks all about how you identify issues, how you protect against, what happens to detect. Again, the moat works a lot of times, but sometimes the moat doesn't. The alligators are full and, you know, you just swim right across because they've already eaten. So, you know, protection is not 100%. So you've got to detect, then you have to respond. What are you going to do about it? And then, of course, if you really have a malware ransomware attack, how are you going to recover? Where are you going to recover to? What are you going to do? How do you do that? And all of that is the type of thing that's covered in the NIST cyber resiliency framework. And then we adhere to that, giving you the right kind of standards, such as the ISO, the ISA, the Council on Cybersecurity, so you know that you're getting the right thing. And again, no charge, and not just for IBM storage only. Obviously, with all the things that we've been doing in our enterprise storage, it isn't surprising that the industry analysts are thinking that, you know, our capabilities with Flash Systems, what we do with our Spectrum software, such as Spectrum Virtualize, our hybrid cloud support that essentially were nearly impossible to beat. So, you know, it's the right bet. Mainline is an outstanding partner for IBM storage. And really key thing, net from this, is make sure that storage is critical to your cyber and data overall strategy. Yes, you need the alligators in that moat. Yes, you need the Great Wall. Yes, you need the police to track the bad guy down. But as you saw from the industry standard specs at the very beginning, CIOs will tell you they often don't know they've got malware or ransomware for a quarter, as long as 2 quarters. The average is close to 200 days before they really discover it, that it's laying dormant and working insidiously behind the scenes to get a hold of your data or destroy it in the case of malware, or get a hold of your data, hold you for ransom. And that's the thing you don't want to do. So Marie, I'd like to thank the team and see if there's any other last questions before I pass it back to Bob.
Thank you, Eric. So now would be the time, if you have any additional questions, to go ahead and send them over to me, and we will get them over here to Eric. But I'm going to go ahead and let Bob just continue on. Oh, let's see. So just getting some high fives. So thank you. We appreciate that. I'm glad it was helpful. So Bob, let's let you go ahead and continue. And then if you do have questions, anybody else has, just go ahead and keep putting them out here in the chat window, and we'll check back one more time before we totally end. So Bob, go ahead.
Eric, I have a couple quick questions, or a quick question. You mentioned 2 diseases. I believe that was Hinklemeyer and Blinksnorf. Is that what those were?
Yes, Hinklemeyer and Bleepsnort.
Because it's funny, I looked them up on WebMD and I can't find them. So I'm just checking.
Well, remember, those cyber criminals come up with their own names.
Does that make you a cyber criminal? I'm not sure. But Eric, thank you so much. I just wanted to recap real quickly some of the reasons to look at Mainline. I mean, I think Eric did an incredible job on talking about why IBM makes sense in this space. And I wanted to just reemphasize where Mainline brings value to the table, in addition to its close partnership with IBM, its broad reach across the country, technical resources. We have flexibility in areas that other manufacturers and vendors simply don't have. And it ranges from lease options all the way to, if you need to do something in an OpEx manner, we can work with you. We do have flexibility in how we deliver those solutions. So I want to make sure you're aware of that. And then the whole range of services that we can provide, it goes from, as you can see there, consultative all the way to support. And that means we've got teams in place, whether it's pre-sales, whether it's the delivery team, whether it's services team doing migrations, whatever the case may be, we will be able to provide the full range of what you need to implement and optimize your environment. So finally, how do you contact us? You can go out to our website, as Marie has down there, the mainline.com, contact us, or you can just send me an email and I'll make sure it gets to the right person within Mainline. So with that, I'm going to, Marie, I'm going to pass it back to you to see if we have any more questions, and if not, then we'll call it a day.
So thanks, Bob. So we have actually one more kind of area of discussion that's come up, and it's around encryption. And the discussion is, if data can be encrypted after it's already been encrypted, then what does that mean to data at rest encryption? Does data at rest encryption really prevent anything other than being fully exposed out to the dark web? So some thoughts about that, Eric.
Yeah, so basically you want to choose what you want to do. Some of the application software allows you to encrypt at the application level. If you choose that, you have protection. The advantage of primary storage encryption, you can select whole arrays or whole volumes to be done, and any and all applications and workloads that are tied to that system or to that volume on a system can then be encrypted. So you've got encryption that can happen at the application level. You've got encryption that can happen at the primary storage level, in which case you wouldn't use the application level. You've got encryption that happens in the backup space. So in this case, you're not encrypting on the primary storage, and you encrypt as you do a backup. So that's great that you're encrypting the backup, but it also means that, if someone steals your backup data, it's encrypted. But if someone steals the primary storage data, it is not encrypted. So the advantage to encrypting either at the application level or at the primary storage level is your data is encrypted, okay, at the primary point of theft, which would be either at the application level or at the primary storage level. We encrypt when we send data out to the cloud, so that helps you when it's in transit. Obviously, any encryption at the cloud site is the function of the cloud provider, right? So you need to make sure that when you're snapping or replicating out and you want to be ensure that you're encrypted on the rest, that your favorite cloud provider that you're using is doing encryption as well. So encryption, of course, you got to figure out where you want it to be. Do you want it in backup? Do you want it on tape, which is also backup? Do you want it to go out to your cloud provider? Obviously, you've got to encrypt while you're in transit to the cloud provider, because if you're encrypting when you get there, while you're moving there, you're not protected. And then obviously you can encrypt data sets either at the application layer or at the primary storage layer. The advantage of primary storage layer, so the old reason you would do it at the application layer is application vendors would tell you if you do it at the application layer, you won't have performance penalties. I'm not sure that's true, but that's what application vendors would tell you. The advantage to do it at the storage level with flash systems is you don't have a performance penalty. So in most other systems in the non-mainframe environment, if you try to do data at rest encryption, right, you actually do have a performance penalty. So that Oracle workload or that SAP workload slows down. That's not true with flash systems. So you don't have to, and you get broader than just doing it application by application by application. But prior to something like flash systems, which can do this encryption with no performance penalty, there could be an argument on why you want to do it at the application layer versus doing it at the storage layer. So you really need to think about it. And, obviously in larger entities, you're going to talk to the software team, the storage team, and sort of work together to figure out where you want that encryption to be, to make sure that, you've got the right thing happening and you're keeping that data safe, because it can get stolen. When it gets stolen, if it's not encrypted, that's easy. If it's encrypted, they've got to try to decrypt it. That's often very difficult to do. So you want to make sure that you're encrypting. And as I said before, you had flash systems in the non-mainframe world. Almost every storage array, including our older arrays, when you did encryption on our older Storewise, you took a performance penalty on the older Storewise products. But with our flash core modules that are on our flash system 5200, our flash system 7200, and our flash system 9200, there is no performance penalty for encryption and decryption. So you can do the entire array or data sets on the array or volumes on the array and not have that. But all storage vendors, have had these issues, which is why the app vendor said, well, just encrypt with us. But now that you've got flash systems with the capability of having no performance penalty, you don't have to do it application by application by application anymore. You can do it at the storage layer. That said, there'll probably be a reason if you're in a big company with a software development team or the app owner is going to say, well, we really think you should do it there. And that's why you need to work together as a team to figure out where you want to do the encryption. But with flash systems, you have the option of doing it at the storage layer without the traditional performance penalty that was happening in all the older storage systems, including our own. Okay, the EMC VNX or VNX2, performance penalty. Today's EMC PowerStore, performance penalty. Nimble, performance penalty. The NetApp products, performance penalty. So today with flash systems, you don't. So there is a valid argument, depending on what you've got in your storage estate, for the application owners to say you need to encrypt with us and not encrypt at the storage level. But when you've got data sets on flash systems, 5200, 7200, 9200, that argument goes away. You can do it at a broader level than application by application and do it securely and do it without the performance penalty. But that's why you would want to work with your application owner teams and your developer teams to make sure everyone's agreeing on where you could do it. But you do have the flexibility and capability of doing that. Do it at the backup level, of course, you want to do it on the backup. So if someone steals the data off the primary, it's not encrypted, right? So you got to make sure you choose where you want to do it. Any last questions?
Thank you, Eric, for that. Thank you so much. So that was great. That was a great way to end. No, our question window is now quiet. So I hope everybody got a lot out of the session today. By the responses I'm getting here, it sounds like it was well received. So Eric, again, thank you for being our guest speaker. We always appreciate and love having you on. Thanks to our audience for being here with us the whole time and being so interactive and engaging. And we look forward to sending out some wine koozies and beer koozies and wine swigs to those people. So we appreciate that. And with that, we'll let you go. Have a super day. Have a great rest of the week. Be safe, and we'll see you again here on another Mainline broadcast soon. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.